Welcome guys to the first lecture in our How Color Works in Game and Level Design section. This lecture we're going to be talking about the different functions of color in games. So pretty much for the first two lectures I'm going to be setting the stage of the emotional and tones and moods impact that colors have in games. I'm then going to be talking about colors as identifiers, so the different types of colors that are used along with glyphs and neutrals and the layouts that ties everything together. But before we get a little bit ahead of that, let's see how color affects games. So in this little lecture, I'm going to be talking about emotion, mechanics, progression, and visual hierarchy. Now, getting down to emotion. So a lot of time in this course, I really explained how color psychology plays on the player's emotion and the impact and what it represents, right? In general. Now I'm going to talk about how that correlates to video games. So when you create a scene to show the player, think of what emotion you want to create for them. See, a color can set the tone and mood of any scene, regardless of what's being shown. Looking at our example to the left. Now this is a dungeon level in World of Warcraft. Now, looking at the colors that are being used. The main ones that stick out are blue, red, and yellow-orange, but mostly yellow. So what does blue represent? Blue represents calmness, relaxation. Looking at the hue, this is a very relaxating hue. Now, paying attention to the top of the room, not the background, the top ground, red. Red is used as another identifier. And red pretty much outlines all the way down to the end of the room. See, when you would look at this image right away, your first reaction would obviously be the blue wall that's on the side, but your eye would spontaneously jump up to the red that's being on top, the coral. And then it would continue down the line all the way to the end of the room where the door is present. Looking at also yellow. See, yellow causes a very horizontal line from the player all the way to the door and then exceeds through the door that's leading up. So as you can see, guys, this was done extremely well by the level designer in the concept art that was created to guide the player. And that's basically what real color design works in terms of emotion and in guiding the player. So the emotion here would generally be a very relaxed, but due to the red, anticipation and a bit of anxiety and anxiousness as we get to that door, because there is something that leads us to that door. So this is one little example of how emotion affects us. A great other example is using the same scene with different colors, each expressing an emotional impact on the player. And generally, this would be color grading. Now, color grading is used often to adjust colors in games. And sometimes it is used to even reduce emotion due to the government requirements. So, example, blood is green instead of red in Germany. That is due to their legislation. But now, if we take a look at how the game was, or how this game different grading is. Let's take a look at the top left one. So as I've said in the previous sections, when it comes to yellow and the brightness of yellow, so it's the aspiration of a new day, a new beginning. So in this shot, the player would most probably feel entering into a town or whatever this little square is, and feeling that it's a fresh new day, new adventure awaits. Excitement would most probably be a great reaction to that. Looking on the right part of that, this would most probably be daybreak or in the middle of the day. So it's very relaxing. Colors aren't really that contrasting right now. So there's really no anticipation. It seems a bit empty, a bit ominous, but not too much. This seems like very abandoned. Looking at the bottom left one, where you have the gradient of very high contrasting yellow with very high contrasting red. So this could be a bit of contrast between the beginning of a new day, but with anticipation of something lurking behind a corner. See, the emphasis on red here really generates the feeling that there is something bad about to happen, or that there is an overshadowing energy that is, in the area that is pure negative. Now looking at the red one, the last one on our image, pure red. This one is the very monochromatic level, where there's different shades of red throughout the entire area. This is a very daunting and foreshadowing event of maybe even a boss fight, or something very dark about to take place here. Now look at the first and fourth one. Look how two different types of colors could affect what the player feels. The first one we had that daybreak, new beginning, excitement happening. The last one, ominous boss fight, very grungy type of, deathly feeling presence in that color. Same scene, different color gradings. So as you can see, guys, emotion plays a huge role when choosing what color you want to take. So the color that you guys choose in terms of how you want to create your level design or your game design will have an immense impact on what you want to tell the player and what the player will feel approaching that specific scene. Now, when it comes to mechanics, using color for mechanics is a very, very clever thing to do. And this can be done in many different ways. One example would be in World of Warcraft when you're fighting one of the bosses. Now, this boss requires you to kill one of 4 slimes. Because if the boss collects all 4 slimes, then he's going to be having all kinds of different debuffs. So the main mechanic here is choosing which slime to kill off over the other one. And that is pretty much based on the debuffs and the scale of debuffs and the impact it has on the players. So obviously the group has to decide quickly once all the 4 blobs spawn which one to kill off very fast. That's a clever way of using color to indicate what type of mechanic has to be used or the rules. Color could also work in memory games as well. Red would be considered red with certain object, green with certain object. Player starts mixing and matching different colors, and they have to remember where they put everything. So when you want to use color inside of mechanics, it's always good to note that there is endless possibilities to use. But don't forget that colors also need to have specific identifiers with them. We're going to see a little bit later on in this section what I refer to that as identifiers. But it's always good to keep in mind that when you want to choose a certain color as a mechanic, that you're not overshadowing the other colors as well. Now looking at progression. See, colors can showcase a player's progression. So it also gives items a quality amount as well. See, looking at World of Warcraft, the WoW item color code. This could showcase the progression that the player has in collecting items. There's also achievements in-game in place that represents, reaching certain types of quality items and then associating that with, obviously the color that has to go along with it. So you could have the same image in terms of, let's say, a sword that are green or purple. But obviously the person that gets the purple sword will obviously have it will be obviously more epic and more important than, or in more value than the green one. So if you want to use color as a progression, one great way is to showcase that in weapons or armor or gear. Another great way is also to show how a player grows in a game in terms of how the levels flow. We're going to basically see this later on in this lecture when we look at content variations in terms of showing sequential or manually choosing level designs. But for this one specifically, we're going to just talk about progression. See, color can showcase a player's progression throughout the entire map. And this could also be used in different acts, in a narrative element, associating that with color layouts. So as you can see in this little color layout, in this little diagram that we have here, the first color is very tan, very dark, dark yellow, and it's very plain as well. And as the player continues throughout the map, it gets lighter and then darker, darker, and then gets lighter again. So you could actually break this down into 3 acts. The first 2 colors would be the first 2 acts. Not a lot going on there. Then the next one is the transition between the light yellow and the dark. So that would be the second act. This could also be in terms of narrative element where the player has something that has happened to them. And now they have to start building up and then restoring themselves and climbing back up, which would be in the third act. And as you can see, it's a mountain. So if you are very familiar with how narrative design works, this is actually pretty much a very good example of how you could break up color elements in terms of progression based on the most formal and basic 3-act structure in a video game. Another key color progression is visual ranking system. So as the player gains higher rankings, the colors become more distinguished and lavish than the previous one. So in this example, we have our colors going from bronze to extremely royal purple. And we can see the different things that they add throughout the different stages. So also using images and obviously using different types of color schematics in order to showcase the value that each ranking has over the other one. You could obviously distinguish diamond over gold any day of the week. You could obviously distinguish bronze over gold as well. So having more prestigious colors and more colors in terms of what psychological impact they have on players in higher levels of progression will obviously make it easier for them to distinguish what ranking they are. And to top it all off in terms of progression, maps, like anything else, are great for progress references. For level design specifically, this is a key to showcasing a player's traveled and unexplored pathways. So example, let's say there's a large map and the player, everywhere the player has walked is marked in green, and everywhere the player hasn't marked is in red. So this gives a player a goal to exploring all the red areas that he has not achieved yet, or in general, not just green and red, just in general using different types of pathways in order to showcase what the player has and has not explored yet through colors on a map. Now looking at visual hierarchy. So now it is important to build your game scene in such a way that it showcases the important elements you want the player to focus on. And when placing elements in a scene, a hierarchy will naturally form. And an example could be the player first, the enemy, ingredients, and the background. Ingredients, just so that we're all understanding, are elements that a player can interact with, such as, jumping on a box, climbing a ladder, shooting a gun. Anything that the player character can interact with is considered an ingredient and must be represented before a background. I go into further detail using visual hierarchy in terms of color as identifier, glyphs, neutrals, and color layouts in the later lectures in this section, but I just wanted to give you a brief understanding how visual hierarchy has to work in order for the player to know what's going on. See, color helps make these focus points more visually exclusive, and using glyphs and neutrals is important to create your identifiers. But taking that a step further, the use of value, saturation, and hues can further distinguish these important elements, and this can help where color is not represented in a game. So example, looking at the last one, going back 1 second, looking at Limbo here, where basically the value, saturations, and tints and tones are how you could differentiate yourself between your visual hierarchy in this scene, because there is no color that is used. It's pure black, white to gray. So as you can see here, the designers use a great job at using these type of shades and tones to distinguish, what's important. So that's something to always keep in mind, guys, is if whenever you're using your color layouts and you want to use your identifiers in your glyphs and neutrals that we're going to see later on, it's always good to know how you want to structure your hierarchy first before you start ascertaining or asserting different colors or your colors to your different elements. And that's it, guys, for this little lecture in the different functions of colors in games. And I'll see you guys in the next one.